So what I'd like to do is, I'm picking up somewhat where Kimberly left off, but rather than focusing just on getting data out of SQL Server, I'd like to take you on a tour of Power BI, a very introductory tour, assuming that you don't know anything about it. Some of you may be experts, so sorry if it's a bit elementary for you, but if it is, you know, maybe you'll hear a new terminology or way to describe something that you find useful and insightful, or not. That's okay. I kind of think of this like when you would first get to your school and the librarian would walk you through the library and say, this is the card catalog and this is the Dewey Decimal System. That's the level we're going to do today, not like, okay, open up your encyclopedias and, you know, find this exact answer. But yeah, hopefully if you're an analyst, what I'd like to show you is how Power BI could be useful for your job if you work with data. It's not a, I'm not with Microsoft. I am a consultant who I do a lot of work with SQL Server and Power BI, but I also want to tell you the bad points where I would not use Power BI because it can be very free to, Melissa gave me a big thumbs up, that's great. It can be very easy and cheap to get started with, and then the complications come like after you're like, okay, I'm ready to push the share button, and then you realize, oh, I've got to license this thing. So some of the gotchas like that. So first, let's just start with what is Power BI. I originally put this together for a group of school administrators. So you guys are going to be more technical than school administrators, but the simplest way I could describe it was Excel on steroids. So how can I get this in 3 words or less? You know, that is oversimplified. What it really is, first thing I've got to do for you is cut through all the marketing stuff, right? So Power BI has become this marketing umbrella for Microsoft. It is a group of technologies for sure. There's a group of technologies that really process the data, and then there's all this cloud stuff around it, right? A whole cloud service where you can render these things online, and there's a mobile app, and they have a lot of features geared toward IT people who've got to manage enterprise reporting platforms and things like that. But for our purposes today, I just want to focus on the data, the core of it, the processing pieces of it. So really at its heart, it has this database engine that is meant to store data in a high performance model. So if you know about databases, it is a columnar store database. It stores data in columns, not rows. It is meant to live in memory. And really it's just what's really great about Kim's talk, having just seen that sort of entities and their relationships, they call it a tabular model. All that means is that it's full of tables and the relationships between the tables. To query, what's interesting is to query that model, you have to use another language called DAX. So we'll see a sample of that. But that is one of those, it's a great language, but also it's one of those possible gotchas. To load this data model, there's also a series of technologies that can connect to diverse data sources and transform data, clean data, and then load it into this model. And that uses a language called M, or is sometimes called PowerQuery. I'm going to actually focus mostly on that part today because that technology is actually now a first-class citizen also in Excel. So if you ever work with Excel, learning that M technology can help you acquire and manage data in Excel. So, and then the third piece I'd like to look at is really just that. They built some cool web HTML5 data visualization technologies that, like, really what it does is it writes a DAX query to query that data model and then renders it with just regular JavaScript stuff. If you're on the website at all, D3 and all that good data visualization stuff that's written for the web. So you can't, first, if you kind of subdivide it that way, it really, I find it's kind of helpful because there's so many terminologies that you can get lost real quick. So at its heart, I wanted to mention that this database engine, this tabular model, is really called Vertipaq. It's been around since 2010, but almost no one ever heard about it when it came out because it was like focused on if you were a cube developer. If you were doing SQL Server analysis services in 2010, you were like one of the 0.1% of the people, you know, in IT who knew what a Vertipaq was. It was one of those things that, you know, cube developers kind of heard about and then thought, well, that's not I don't know, never going to become mainstream, right? Well, with Power BI, they're kind of trying to push it into the mainstream. And that's one of the challenges, is sometimes to drop this on someone's desktop and say, you're a cube developer now. It's like, well, no, not really. I have a lot to learn. What can I actually use it for? That's what we're going to focus on. So where might you use Power BI in your analyst work? And I guess I should say, if you'd like to talk to me afterward, I'll be here for at least until 1 to answer questions. And also, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to stop and answer, and I'll try to repeat it for people on Twitch. So how this might actually help your work? Well, the first thing that came to my mind was about this whole PowerQuery thing. Okay, what's PowerQuery? Microsoft created this language called M. It's a true programming language. It's fully functional. It's a functional language, actually. But it's really like specifically designed for data, which is actually very cool. It's like, what does that mean? But we're going to look at an example. They also made something called the PowerQuery editor, which lets you build this script, this functional language script, step by step, visually, usually. So some of the downsides to this, as we get into it, it has many different kind of connectors. It can connect to all kinds of data, including SQL Server. Which was what I first thought we might talk about, but it can also connect to CSV files and JSON files, and then all those other great databases out there, Mongo and Oracle and Postgres and all that good stuff, right? MySQL. The downside might be that it doesn't have as many destination connectors. Really, right now, the way it is implemented today, it can output well to Excel, or it can output well into Power BI. I have no doubt Microsoft could easily write connectors that would also be data outputs. They have this concept called data flows. They're kind of trying to push in, they're going to run in the cloud. They run this technology in the cloud to connect to data and transform it. But I think that they kind of use it as a funnel to get data into their own technologies. So just be aware of that. It's not necessarily a general purpose ETL tool, although it could be. So let me show you kind of what that looks like. So when you open Power BI, after you kind of get over the initial, like, what in the world is this, shock, the place that you find PowerQuery and M is here. If you click this Edit Queries button up at the top, so it's up in the ribbon under the Home menu, and you say Edit Queries, or if you say Get Data, it's going to take you basically to the same place. When you say Get Data, you're seeing the list of all the possible connectors that they have written for PowerQuery and M. So you see, hopefully, some of your favorites for storing data: text and CSV, XML, JSON. Cool stuff. You can point it to a folder full of text files that all have the same format, and it can iterate through all those files and put them into one big data table for you. So super helpful for dealing with logs or that daily data dump that you get. It can read tables out of PDFs. It can connect to websites and do the whole scraping thing for you if the website's in a pretty solid format. And then you see all these other really cool. I mean, most of what you look for is here. Anything that supports ODBC will be here. So that is all the different connectors. I wanted to show an example today of how we might get some data out of JSON to start with, because that may be something you have come across before. So I've got this basic JSON file, and inside of it, it has some transactions and sales. I don't know if I can quickly, yeah. Let me try this real quick, just so you can see what's inside of it. Sorry about that. No, I don't want to download it. Yeah, this came, I think this actually is a real JSON file from some cash register, so don't look too close. But anyway, you see that we're selling SKUs, and here's the description of it and what the price was. Let's say that was the item data we wanted to get out of this file. There's some header information up here at the top as well. Let me show you how PowerQuery connects to that and how you can, basically, you write a script to deal with that file. What it starts off showing you doesn't really look like much. So now it opened the PowerQuery editor, and you can it looks kind of like the Power BI screen, but it has different options in the ribbon. And then up here in the title, you can also tell it says PowerQuery editor. What it started to do is on the left side, it lists out the queries. It made a new query. It just called it the name of the file by default. and it added a step. These applied steps over here is where a lot of the magic happens. At first, it's showing me what looks like not very much. Basically, I told it JSON.document. You're going to connect to a JSON file, and here it is. So they're like, okay, well, I opened it, and what I saw was an element that said PM data and an element that said event. We can click into that event record, and what it did was add another step for me on the side. Oh, I see, you navigated into the event record. So it kind of like, it's like a macro, if you've ever done one of those recorded macros. It's a little bit like that, recording a repeatable script for you. It sees that there is a control record and a list full of items. I wish I had left that open again. It probably left it open for me. There we go. We went inside of event, and sure enough, there's a control element and then an array. That's a JSON array with a bracket, square bracket, full of items. Oh, okay, well, I want the items. Give me those. Okay. Oh, I found all these records. Interesting. Well, what's in the record? Well, it turns out I can actually click on a single record, and it'll get me down to what it was. But this isn't quite what I was looking for, because what I wanted was really to get a table full of this information, right? That's kind of what I was looking for. So what you can do is go over to the applied steps and just X out any of the steps or change them. So undo my navigation step. Let's go back to click into the event, click into the items. So what I was missing was this little magic step that says to table. So, okay, convert this all into a table for me. That'll be fine, sure. Now it's turned it into basically it's gonna turn it into a Vertipaq table. And then there's this magic expand button. You almost wouldn't notice this thing over here. But what this is really saying is, look at each of the elements inside this array and break them out into columns. So, okay, cool. I got it all into tables, and it kind of gave them little names from what they were called: SKU, description, price. What's really going on here and where the magic is happening is if I right-click on this and I say, show me this advanced editor, this is M. Like it or not, or find it beautiful or not, that is what M code looks like. And I'd love to blow that up for you a little bit. I'm sure if I was a Windows guru, I could do that, but it goes step by step. It's like, let our source be this JSON document. Now we're gonna navigate into the event element. Then we're gonna navigate into the items element. And then it has this like table.fromList method. Thankfully, I didn't have to know all these methods, or I didn't have to know this language myself, right? I just used the GUI to build this script, but it records it for me. And then this last one, table.expand record column. Thankfully it blew out all this syntax, which I would not want to type by hand. So it's kind of neat because the GUI designer is going to build this script for me. I can run it again at any time. I can point it to a different file and say, now that I've written this, import this other JSON file, right? Actually, if I even say close and apply, you'll kind of see what Power BI does. There we go. It connects to that file. It already loaded it pretty quickly. Small file. But you can, it's kind of nice to know if you're a technical kind of person, maybe you work with R or Python, you're kind of used to dealing with some scripting, that you can do that scripting here too. You can get in there and change the code, and you can look up the full M language specification, you know what I mean, and find the full documentation if you want to. So it is out there. Yeah, it's all out there. Yeah, you need to like I don't know if they've actually published this out as a book yet, as books yet, because, you know, it just changes so fast, but it is a fully fledged language, which is kind of nice to know. And you might think, okay, this is weird. Would I learn a proprietary language just to work with Power BI? Maybe not. I could kind of get that. But one of the cool things is, like I alluded to earlier, this language and this whole engine is actually pretty much baked into Excel these days. So if you ever come across Power Pivot, anybody heard of Power Pivot? Okay, I see a few heads shaking, thank goodness, or nodding. That's good. You can say, that's when you say get data, you now get this very similar experience. I'm actually just going to say blank query on this. It'll open up the blank query editor for me. I can Where's my advanced editor? Over here somewhere? No, it's over here. There we go. Click on my advanced editor. I can just copy and paste that whole script in there. And now Excel knows how to run this whole query. Close and load, and it actually read through that JSON file and dumped it into Excel for me. So that's, even as an intermediate step, knowing a little bit of M could be helpful. Especially if you used it in that situation where, say, you have a folder full of JSON files and they're all the same format. You can kind of let this script process them all, combine them into a spreadsheet for you, and then maybe you go to the next step. You know, maybe Power BI never comes into play after that. But that Power Query editor, it's all here too. If you look closely enough in Excel, you'll find Table Tools, Design, under Data. It's kind of hidden because they don't want to overwhelm people, but there is a Launch Power Query, oh sorry, I skipped right over it. There's a Launch Power Query Editor button right there under the Get Data menu. It's, like I said, they're kind of mainstreaming it, where at first it was real niche, but now they're trying to make this tool more, this language and this tool more available for everybody. So then imagine taking some data from JSON and some from CSV and some from your company database or mainframe, and then mashing it all together using Power Query. Pretty effective tool for sure. Any questions on that first element about Power Query and data acquisition? I should mention that I'm kind of going down the main path. This is sort of the default use case, or the happy path for how data gets into Power BI. It gets loaded into a Vertipaq engine. There is another option called Direct Query, where basically Power BI translates it into the native syntax of the data source. So that it works really well with SQL Server, which shouldn't surprise you since that's another Microsoft product and they kind of go hand in hand. But I wanted to bring up here this list of other sources that it will do that with. So Redshift is on there, several Azure things as you see, Google BigQuery, Oracle, both database and Essbase are on there. SAP HANA is a common one to hit because using SAP's tools is a real pain. Snowflake is getting to be more popular, and Spark, I'm sure a lot of you have come across that. So you can kind of say, now that doesn't use Power Query and M anymore. It's called Direct Query, and it will literally translate things into SQL syntax if it's an SQL source, or whatever the other query language of these tools is, their native language, so to speak. But I would think, I just wanted to introduce you to M and Power Query and what it is and why you use it, because what happens with a lot of people is they open up Power BI, they say get, which is great, and this is the experience Microsoft was trying to create. They say get data from Excel, they pick their Excel file and it loads, and it suddenly appears over here on the right, and they're happy. And they just hit refresh and everything just works. You know what I mean? They don't even know there's a whole Power Query editor going on. But for analysts, that's a powerful tool that you might miss out on if you just try to use the Power BI side of it. I'll try to hit one more of these scenarios where you might use it. Once the data is loaded in this tabular model that is the Vertipaq engine, you use a syntax called DAX to query it. Power BI does a lot of that for you again. It's going to handle a lot of that complexity for you. I might have started over at the beginning, sorry. But DAX has some really good functions for expressing complicated formulas to perform over really structured data. So it's got some good time intelligence kind of queries built in there. It has some functions that say, hey, just give me the same period from last year. And if you're using a calendar year, it kind of just does it all for you. So if your data is in that tabular model, relationships, once you define those relationships, the Vertipaq engine knows how to use them to filter your data quickly. So let me just show you that again really quick. So like I mentioned, I set this particular report up for school administrators. So I pulled in some fake class data and student data. But this is kind of cool because it might remind you of what Kimberly was showing us. Data gets loaded into tables that all represent entities. So I've got a table full of students down here, and it was really cool. We happened to both use classes and enrollments. This focuses a little more on attendance, so that attendance happens inside of school years, and there are also classes that they attend or don't attend. And these relationships, they look kind of just like, oh, small, you might not notice them, and these have these little triangles, I don't know what that means. You define that relationship, they become actually really, really important because it will do automatic filtering and automatic calculations for you based on those relationships. So we can tie we tie one column to another column, and we set a cross-filter direction. So it does this automatic cross-filtering. Why that becomes useful is that I can start to create some very good graphs very easily. Like if I say I want to show my attendance codes across this axis, and in the value I want to count the number of times there was an absence, it just sort of works automatically. You know what I mean? That's the cool thing about it, is it will create this graph for me, and it seems almost automatic that I've taken attendance codes out of this table. Whether or not it was excused is here in the legend. I can just get rid of that. And then from the attendance table, I can just drag in attendance code and say, all right, just count this up and tell me how many attendances or absences there were. I might have even mentioned that I wanted only absences, but it works just like, wow, I got this great graph. That's exactly what I wanted, right? Or if I wanted to see a pie chart, I can quickly switch to the visual of a pie chart, and there's no code I had to write, or nothing like that. Put it into more like a pivot table type of view. That's great. I can use DAX to do more complicated formulas. So I could say, well, only give me those show me the absences that happened on a Thursday and make that a different measure. So these are the Thursday absences. I can say, what about things that were national holidays or, right before fall break? This thing, so you can use DAX to write formulas like that. It gets kind of complicated, and that's the downside to it. You have to learn then DAX, which really means you're learning the Vertipaq database engine underneath. If you end up storing with and working with a lot of data in that engine, it's totally worth it to learn it, because it can process a lot of data relatively for a desktop technology. It can store a ton of data because of that columnar data storage and that compression it gets. It can process it quickly. But again, your data is kind of bound. That becomes the downside. Your data becomes kind of bound in that Vertipaq model and bound to DAX. So I think I might have to write Vertipaq there, but that's one of the downsides. So then the last thing I just I'll mention before I go is, I won't show a demo of this, but of course you can visualize data. So it was drawing those nice charts for me. I can set the colors. The way that their licensing model works though is that once you publish this, you can publish it to the Power BI service, but you'll need a license to make it private, basically. Or if you want to share it with someone else, they need a license, inside your organization. It's not very expensive. It's only $10 a month. So if you work for a small company, Power BI can be a really nice fit. It's okay, we're paying $30 a month for the three of us to use it. If you work for a larger company, it can get more complicated. Or if you aren't comfortable putting data in the cloud, you have to go look at their on-prem product. Also, one thing I've noticed, I've used Tableau quite a bit, and some of you have or are. You might be accustomed to having a lot of control over these visuals. What they do in Power BI is they kind of give this like visual in a box to you. Drive me the rows, give me the columns, give me the filters, and then they have this paint roller called format. And then so it all depends on what the designer of the visual exposed to you, the report author, as far as what settings you can set. So you end up learning each visual, kind of where are the tips and tricks with this particular visual. You can go out to the marketplace and get custom visuals, but if you want to write something that's completely custom and totally on your own, you're writing your own code. You're writing your own JavaScript and JSON to specify it and import it, and so it's more complicated that way. If you have a real custom, like it has to look just like this, you might be better off either starting from code from the scratch, or maybe looking at R or Python or maybe even Tableau. Tableau, you get more control, I've noticed. So those are the main things about Power BI. Hopefully it's helpful to start to get a sense of the syntax and what's involved there, so that you can decide when to use it and when not to use it. But if you work with a lot of text data or data in Excel, or you're a very heavy Microsoft shop, I mean, Power BI could be a very good fit for you. Any other questions I can field? Yes, sir.
Speaking about syntax, what would you say DAX is closest to?
Yeah, the question was kind of what syntax is DAX closest to? So when they first started designing the DAX language, they were wanting to do it for people who were those Excel power users. And there are many formulas that look just like Excel. Sum, count, average, all follow the exact same syntax. Then they realized that they were going to get more advanced. And then it deviates from Excel quite a bit. So Excel, you probably have done a VLOOKUP or an HLOOKUP or an index match before. You don't have to do those anymore because those relationships between the tables are pretty much handling that for you. It knows how to look up another row in another table based on that value. But you use the calculate statement a lot. And calculate lets you calculate a number, but then tell it, change the filter, change how you're going to filter these tables in this certain way. So there's a book by Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari called The Definitive Guide to DAX. That is very good, I would recommend. If you are getting into DAX, that one is the one to read probably. Any other questions about Power BI? Yes, sir.
Is that changing, or when you have the DAX script, is that changing similar to like running a VBA macro?
When you were making the PowerQuery step-by-step script, I'm sorry, the question was, when you have a DAX script, is it similar to making a VBA macro? Somewhat. When you are writing this PowerQuery M, it's making a script for you that looks a little bit like that experience of making a VBA macro. On the other hand, it's definitely not Visual Basic. It's written in M and not Visual Basic for applications. DAX is not at all a functional, well, it's not a language like that you write many lines. So not, so. You could call DAX from a VBA macro, yes. DAX is almost like a query language. I did want to bring up, this is some automatically generated DAX that Power BI actually created to render one of those graphs. And some of these are maybe more complicated than they need to be, but you'll see methods in there like this, like summarize these columns or select these columns, apply these filters. Yeah, that kind of, that's what it actually looks like. So you don't end up writing DAX too much unless you're trying to query something called an analysis services tabular model. So it's sort of like that whole engine, but you can run it on a server like a database and query it if you want to. So, yes, sir?
Having used Tableau and Power BI at this point, like what types of organizations are you're investing in?
It's a good question. So the question was, having used Tableau and Power BI, which types of organizations are probably better suited to which product? For me, if I see an organization who's very Microsoft dedicated, especially about Azure Active Directory, if they've kind of got that cloud and Azure Active Directory thing figured out, Power BI makes a lot of sense. It's tied a lot to the Office 365 groups. They can use that to secure their assets. And working so well with SQL Server, it has a preference for those data sources. But Tableau, I've seen used more in, it seems like there are certain verticals that prefer Tableau, like healthcare and sometimes finance. Of course, there's tools like Spotfire that oil and gas really loves. Tableau has been priced more aggressively. It's been more expensive historically, but then they were acquired by Salesforce in the last week, so that could change, or it could get, maybe it becomes a story where it's like, well, if you use Salesforce, maybe Tableau makes sense. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, sure, yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So why does business intelligence seem to be more valuable to businesses and get paid more than report writing?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was why business intelligence skills seem to be more valuable than just report writing. And it's probably some of you have been in both of those roles at different times. I think there is a perception out there that report writing is easier for some reason, or it's a more common skill. The best answer I could give is that business intelligence is a little broader, involving how do we manage the data as an enterprise. You get a lot more into the process of like I think probably the key difference is you have to model the data. When you do business intelligence, you have to know how to design a data model either in a relational database, or you need to know about all the different kinds of data storage platforms out there, like NoSQL and unstructured data, distributed data systems, to know when to store what kind of data. And so it's more of a broad reach that I don't know if anyone could get their hands on all of the world of analytics, from cradle to grave. It's too much. So I see Jess over there, so I better wrap it up. Yeah. Thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's great. It's perfect. Yeah.
But we just have to wrap it up because I know we're over a little bit, but yeah, I was going to talk to you afterwards because I know you had some more slides and maybe potentially either following up.
Okay, yeah, I'll just follow up. I'll follow up individually with anybody who has questions. That's perfect. I didn't have many more slides, so
Oh,
it's all good.
you're
Okay, it's
good.
all good. Thanks.
But just want to say, thank you guys for coming. These are the type of talks we plan on having more of in the future, but we are still looking for a speaker for July meeting. I believe it's July 15th. So if any of you guys are interested, or if you guys have a topic that you guys would be interested in having presented, just Slack us in the OKC Analytics group in Techlahoma and just let us know some things that you guys would like to see. So thank you guys, appreciate it.